There have long been questions about Emily Dickinson and religion. Oftentimes, even the most devout of critics, when talking about Emily Dickinson and religion, have to concede that there is some type of conflict there. But oftentimes, Emily Dickinson and the question of God are sort of assumed to be more set. People think oftentimes that Emily Dickinson was a person who believed in divine creation. The poem, which we will be exploring today, calls even that into question and muddies the water. My thoughts on this dynamic, I'll share them in this discussion. The Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of videos dedicated completely to the greatest poet, in my opinion, of all time. And if you have a different opinion, it's okay. You're just wrong. The second playlist will be the poetry discussion playlist, now over 500 videos strong. And, well, let's just get into it. The poem in question today, Going to Heaven, it reads as such. Going to heaven, I don't know when, pray do not ask me how. Indeed, I'm too astonished to think of answering you. Going to heaven, how dim it sounds, and yet it will be done, as sure as flocks go home at night unto the shepherd's arm. Perhaps you're going too. Who knows? If you should get there first, save just a little place for me close to the two I lost. The smallest robe will fit me, and just a bit of crown. For you know we do not mind our dress when we are going home. I'm glad I won't believe it, for it would stop my breath. I'd like to look a little more at such a curious earth. I'm glad they believe it, whom I have never found since the mighty autumn afternoon I left them in the ground. So this I think it's easy to read this poem and still fall into the thought process that this is someone who is professing their sort of maybe not belief but conviction that heaven is there and creation and God are mysterious or more difficult than our mortal minds would be able to comprehend. But I think that if we're looking at the tone of this poem, something different comes out. Going to heaven with an exclamation point. This is not a question. It is a statement. I don't know when. Pray don't ask me how. Indeed, I'm too astonished to think of answering you. So this is accepting going to heaven. But anyone who's sort of in the cloth of Christianity knows that everyone is supposed to take this with question. You're not supposed to accept whole cloth, if you will, that you will be going to heaven. And Emily Dickinson does call that into play here. Perhaps you're going to, who knows? Well, if we don't know about who it is that we're speaking to, why would we be so sure that we ourselves, our speaker at least, uh, the speaker is going to heaven? Going to heaven, how dim it sounds. Now, you could read this as the words going to heaven do not do justice to the kingdom itself, but what we have here is not that. Going to heaven, how dim it sounds, could also mean how dim heaven itself sounds. I'm glad I don't believe it, for it would stop my breath. Don't believe the fact that, oh, I'm going to heaven. So this is a place where this poem could very easily get back into worship or praise of the afterlife in general. I can't believe that I'll go to a place so grand, but that's not what is happening here. This is saying, I'm glad I don't believe it, for it would stop my breath. When in the very opening of this poem, our speaker is saying, I'm going to heaven, matter of factly. I'm going to heaven. Then I'm glad I don't believe it. Maybe this is an individual struggling with their acceptance of something so grand existing when this earth itself is not the grand place that is not a place so grand as to end all other want. But we don't get that either because our speaker is saying, look, don't stop my breath. I would like to have a little more look at this curious earth, this place that is so grand. Maybe our speaker is simply observing the grand nature of nature and trying to comprehend something even better than that. But when you take this into account, save a little place for me next to the two I lost, because I'm glad they did believe it. I'm glad they had some comfort that they took with them, and I haven't seen them since they were buried. For me, this I think that Emily Dickinson, over the course of something like 40 years, or at least what we believe would have been 40 years from the stuff that we put, she didn't publish during her lifetime, right? So we are sort of reverse engineering what we believe her career and writing process and the timelines of her poems to be. But if it's easy for me to remember many Emily Dickinson poems, it would have been easy for Emily Dickinson to remember many of her poems before she ever put them to paper or before papers that she had were lost. Over 40 years, 1,775 poems, this individual struggled, it seems, greatly with the ideas of religion, with ideas of God, with ideas of infinity, and everything else. Everything else that you or I struggle with during our lifetime, Emily Dickinson did so, and seems, in my estimation, to have gotten much further with all of these thought processes than I would have gotten, even with her help along the way. Now, I have a quote here from Christopher Hitchens from Letters to a Young Contrarian, and I want to read it because whether you agree with Christopher Hitchens or not, whether you agree with Emily Dickinson or not, help through these thought processes will strengthen you even if you are on what, regardless which side of this argument you are on. Hitchens said, "Beware the irrational, however seductive. Shun the transcendent in all who invite you to subordinate or annihilate yourself. Distrust compassion. Prefer dignity for yourself and others. Don't be afraid to be thought arrogant or selfish. Picture all experts as if they were mammals. Never be a spectator of unfairness or stupidity. Seek out argument for disputation for their own sake. The grave will supply you plenty of time for silence. Suspect your own motives and all excuses. Do not live for others any more than you would expect others to live for you." This seems to be more of the ethos from which Emily Dickinson is presenting this poem. There seems to be, in my estimation, a bit of spite in this poem. If God is so grand, if religion is so grand, if heaven itself is so grand, why must it tear these two that I love so dearly from me? There's plenty of grandeur in heaven to be exalted and celebrated in its own time. Why take these things from me? A sentiment I'm sure we can all understand, if not empathize with. One of the other things that Hitchens used to say was that though he found himself without religion, without faith, he was happy for others to have it if that's what supplied them with some form of comfort. We get that sentiment here from Emily Dickinson as well, saying, hey, I'm glad these two do believe it. I'm glad they did believe it, whom I have never found since the mighty autumn afternoon I left them in the ground. So Emily Dickinson is not wishing to take anyone else's thoughts or religion or beliefs, values, principles, faith from them, just saying, hey, I don't know if I can get there, man. And That is probably as stark a reminder or as stark a tipping of the hand that as any that I can imagine. For someone to say, look, you don't want to believe, don't believe. I think it's very difficult to assume that that comes from a place of belief. For someone who believes to say, if you want to go to hell, go ahead, man, it's your call, is difficult, in my opinion, to reconcile. Emily Dickinson here seems to be of the belief that, hey, whatever your belief is, that's your belief. It's not for me to, it may be for me to influence, but it's not for me to provide to you, quote unquote, whole cloth. Another another bit of wisdom from Emily Dickinson, another bit of struggle from Emily Dickinson. And isn't that all that poetry and literature are? They are our little corners of struggle, of triumph, of test. Yeah. So for me, what this poem really exemplifies is someone who was struggling with these ideas, someone who, in this line of questioning would not have gone over well in the world that Emily Dickinson inhabited. Very, very devout time period in which she lived. And it is maybe no wonder that she did not publish in her lifetime. She may have been I mean, these thoughts are radical even for today. Christopher Hitchens, who seemed to be spouting much of the same belief as Emily Dickinson here, died in 2011, but it was around, I believe it was 2011. It was around, the 2008 time period, I believe, where he was making waves, 2006, 2008, with um, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. That's when he was making those rounds, and it was very controversial, even in that time period. So, 150 years before, going to be very, very difficult to spout those beliefs then as well. That's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.